Hello, good morning. Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone had a good weekend, good New Year's, all that stuff. I certainly did. Okay, get this set up. All right, so what are we doing today? Well, I've been working on some of the asset subsystem stuff, or the asset util, rather. And here it is right here. So just like any other utils that are going to be inside of Gunslinger, it's going to be something that's optional. You don't have to include it, you don't have to use it. But if you'd like to, then it's going to be included and used the same way that the immediate draw stuff is. You have to define the implementation in one of the C files, and then right after that you include your asset header. See, it relies on Gunslinger implementation, so do that first, but then it should work. All right, so what is an asset? An asset handle is give it back to you. It's just a collection of IDs. So there's a type ID that gets hashed for the particular type that you're using for the asset, and the asset is defined by the user, so you could declare whatever you want to be an asset, doesn't matter. Then you have an asset ID, which is just a slot handle ID into the slot array for the assets, and then you have an importer ID, which is a way that I'm slightly using for type safety. And we have different methods for creating asset handles, stuff you don't have to worry about. So how do assets actually get loaded in from file? Because most assets typically are raw resources, and you bring those in, you transform them some way to some kind of engine level description or declaration or whatever you want to say. Hey, Dindy. Good morning. So what does that look like? How do you do that? What I've done in the past and what I tend to like is having something like an importer that is it's just in my case it's just a collection of function pointers that describes, well, this is the importer description. The importer itself actually holds all the data for the actual assets, which I'll go over that in a second. But this is the description that you give out for an importer whenever you're declaring it or registering it with the asset system. So we have a load from file function, a unit A, which you give it a path to where your asset lives, a void pointer so that you can actually fill out the data. You'll cast that to whatever your data is, and then some optional parameters if your function needs more parameters to fill out, whatever. The font size is perfect for the live. Good, because it's unbearably large on my end, but I know that it looks good on the stream, so I'll keep it at this. But it's very awkward to work like this. Maybe if I just do this, that'd be better. Okay, so asset importer. What's an asset importer? Again, the asset importer is what you're going to use to, well, import assets or import raw resources and convert them into assets. That's the idea. So what we have here is we have a void pointer for all of the actual data. So this is the asset data. It's basically making a slot array declaration, but having to do it manually just because of the way that void pointers work, which I'll go over that in a second. So we have a pointer for the actual slot array itself. We have a pointer for the data pointer, which I might be able to get rid of this because they should be the same pointer. Actually look at a slot array declaration. So the indices should actually be the first pointer, assuming that the data is aligned properly, which it should be. So I might be able to get rid of this, but couple things we have to store. We have to store a temp ID, and that's just because we're doing this inside of macros, which I'll show that in a second. We have an importer description that has these function pointers that are stored inside of it. We have an importer ID, which is it's basically just a static ID that gets incremented. And again, that's just for type safety. And then you have a default asset that you can create for your importer, which is down here. We actually have a default asset default function, and we also have a default, or if we have a default asset function pointer that you can register with your descriptor. So when registering an importer, you're going to pass in a reference to the asset manager that you're using, which holds all this data, the type for the actual asset, which gets hashed, and then the descriptor, which has the function pointers. Create a default asset importer object. We set the data size to whatever the type is that you want this asset importer to be registered with. We set its importer ID, which again is just a static ID that gets incremented. It's a uint, so 4 billion possible asset importers if you want something like that. And then we have a set description function. This is just going to set the descriptor to this asset importer. If it doesn't have functions that are filled out for it, then it sets it to one of the defaults up here. And then we have to init all the slot arrays. Again, this is just because doing this inside of the macro makes it kind of difficult. And then we hash the type. So we do a 64-bit hash of the type, and then we hash that to a string. And then we push that back as a key value pair into our hash table of our importers. And then the load from file macro, which is generic, is this big monster here. So what we do first is that we're going to assert that the importer actually exists with the type that you give in. Again, you pass in the type, and then we're going to hash that to a string, and then hash that to a 64-bit integer, unsigned integer. And then we need to store a couple of things. So the way these macros work is that they all work with the comma operator. The comma operator is kind of interesting. You can't declare any new variables on the stack, but what you can do is assign. So this is why I store these temp things inside of the asset manager, and also inside of the importer itself, is so that you can assign these things, and I can use them inside of this big macro. The reason I have to use the macro again is because if you want to do something generic like this in C, you can't push this off to a function. It has to be inside of a macro. So you know the type, you can get the data size from the type, all that kind of stuff. All right, so basically what this does is it'll call your load from file function, pass in all the arguments that it needs for that, and then it pushes it back into the slot array, grabs the ID for that, and then creates a handle. And then it returns that asset handle back to you. Here's the asset manager. It's just a hash table of importers. And again, we have this temp importer that I use for this macro. And then here's that free importer ID that gets incremented every time you register an importer. And for getting an asset, it's very simple. You just call this macro here, which you pass in a reference to the asset manager, you pass in the type that you're interested in, and then you pass in the handle. The reason you have to do these two is because it does some type checking between the two. It makes sure that the importer matches up the importer ID with the handle that you provide. It makes sure that the type itself is the exact same. And that's just simple type checking. Okay, and then here's just some of the stuff that gets filled out. So this is the actual get asset implementation. So again, you pass in a type ID for the actual type. You're passing in the asset handle, and we do type checking here. Grab the importer. We make sure that those two IDs match up. If they do, then you're good to go. And then down here, we actually do some pointer magic in order to return a void pointer back to your data. Okay. And then default stuff. So again, this is more or less a full asset manager implementation. Maybe a few things that are missing here that would be nice to have, but it's 190 lines of code with this. So actually get rid of all the comments, and it's fewer than 100 lines of code basically. and this will handle all of our assets. So how do we use it? Let's go up here and let's show it off. AVMA. So again, for the asset implementation, just define it and then include the header that you'd like to use for the util. Define a new asset manager. So it's going to be something that you actually declare and you use. And then these are the asset handles that we'll use. So we have a couple asset handles that are going to be textures, one that's going to be a font. So the asset handles themselves are not, they're not strongly typed. So that's the only thing that's kind of wishy-washy and that's kind of not the happiest about. But again, inside of the asset handle, it has all that information to do some kind of type safety. So it'll at least give you, it'll give you an error if you're doing something wrong. So how do you make a new asset? It's very simple. Just declare what your asset's going to be. So just a typical struct declaration. So in my case, if I want to do something like an asset that's a texture, I could do something like this, where I have a resource handle to an actual graphics texture in the back. So an asset texture and a graphics texture are two different things. For that case, I might actually change the name of this. It might be like graphics image or something like that. But this is just a resource handle to that backend texture, and then you're going to hold the information for the texture description. So width, height. If you want to hold on to the data, you can do that, stuff like that. And then you declare a load texture from file function. And again, this is going to be passed up in the asset importer descriptor. So for here, we're just going to grab the texture that's passed in. So it gets passed in as a reference, and it'll be stack allocated. So you don't have to worry about the memory not being allocated for you. It's going to be there. The only thing you can't do is free the memory, because you'll definitely segfault if you do that. But what you're doing is you're actually filling out this information. So we're going to fill out for this texture the descriptor that we're interested in. And again, if we wanted some more parameters up here, we could pass in like a min filter, stuff like that we actually wanted to do, but don't really care for now. And then we have a util that I've provided in Gunslinger. It just uses STB in the back end to load texture data. So it just gives you all the texture data, and then it'll fill out these parameters for you. And then we create the actual texture handle in the graphics backend. Free our data because we're not interested in it, and then we null it. We also have something here for fonts. So this is kind of the next thing that I'm working on. I'm gonna try and wrap up today, is just doing fonts. So you have a character information. So this is a per glyph type of structure. And then you have an actual font, which has a void pointer to internal font info. So STB handles this. And then we have a bunch of glyph data. So it's all these individual glyphs, and then a handle to the atlas for the texture. And then loading from file. So again, you're starting to see a pattern here. We have another load from file, but this is a little different. So it has the file path, it has the actual data that you're filling out, but then it has some optional parameters that you can provide. So for this instance, we're interested in the point size because we need to load the texture atlas to be a particular point size. So we provide that. We do everything to load the font. This is all, just font creation stuff. And then we create our font atlas with that description, and then we're done. Just free our data at the end. So here's the initialization. So this is default stuff. We're going to create a new command buffer for our application. We're interested in doing some immediate drawing, so we're going to create a new immediate draw object. And then for our assets, we don't have to create or anything. We're just going to start registering importers, and then we're able to use it. So pass in a reference to the asset. What's the type that we're interested in? For this, it's going to be textures. And then we pass up a new importer description where the load file function is going to be this load texture from file. Same thing with the font. Again, we're interested in fonts, and then we pass up the load from file being the load font from file. And then we can start using it. So our text handle that we want, load from file, the type that we're interested in, and then the path to it. Same thing for this one, and then for the font, we'll do the same thing. So what I'm thinking about doing in the future, actually, to make this a little nicer, is getting rid of this. And this load from file instead is going to look at the file extension. And what you'll do for your importer is you could set something like dot extensions equals, you know, some extension array like that. And therefore, you know, you can register certain extensions to work with your types, and you don't have to be so explicit right here about it because you've already been explicit about it in the back end, basically. So again, there's two ways to get assets after you've registered them. You can get them by pointer, or you can just get them stack allocated. So you could do gs assets get p for get pointer, pass and reference the assets, the type, and then the handle for the asset you're interested in. Again, if the ID for this, the type ID and the importer ID don't match up with the importer that this gets and the type ID that this returns when it's hashed, you'll assert for now. Or you won't assert, it'll just give you a warning. So if you try to do that, it'll give you a warning, and then it'll pass back a null pointer to you. There's also this way. So we could just do a stack allocated asset, just called get. It's the same. The exact same function parameters, but instead of get, it's get p, and it returns you back a stack allocated asset instead of a pointer to it. And if it doesn't find this, it returns you the default for that importer. So, which could be useful in the future. You know, you're going along doing something, say you've made like a really complicated material system, you have some texture that could be bound to a particular uniform for that material or some parameter, and the texture is not bound. You could set it to some default value like a bright magenta that, you know, lets you know that something's wrong. When you get that magenta back, you know, you'll know something's messed up. So Unity does this. In the back end, the default texture for Unreal is like a checkered texture, just stuff that you know that something's wrong. Okay, and then here's some immediate mode rendering. Hey, Sean. So a little complicated looking, but we're just going to set up a 3D camera, set up some parameters. So we're going to enable depth, do some rotation, set up the face culling, and then just do some simple rendering. So we're going to enable one of our textures. So I think the stash texture, and then do some rendering. So do a box, do a sphere, disable the texture, so we pass in a null texture. Disable face culling, then we do some line rendering, enable the font textured, and do that as a rect that's rotating in 3D, and then we set a 2D camera and do our font texture. And then we finally render everything. And that's what we have here. So again, we have this sphere, which you can't see because it's doing lines until I hold down P, and then it does triangles. And so it's a UV wrapped sphere. We have a spinning box with lines that are extending from the normals. And then we have our font texture up here. So that's what we have so far. What I'd like to finish up today is, right now a lot of this stuff is kind of sitting out in the open. I'd like to provide utilities to do default asset types. But I don't know if I want to include inside of the asset subsystem or if I want to make that a separate thing. Which I might make it a separate thing, because you could be able to load up a texture, but not have to use the asset manager if you didn't want to. Same thing with fonts, you could do the same thing. Yeah, I might do that. So we have this asset manager util you could use. We might have something else that maybe we just include. So we have it's actually a picture of my father-in-law, believe it or not. I have another one from my manager, old manager. Yeah, it's text. So that's a meme we made of one of my old managers. Oh, so that's interesting. So that should be the case. If you're doing line drawing, the texture that you had is going to still be bound. Yeah, so maybe that's something I changed, maybe it's not. Maybe it doesn't matter. Anyway. So like I was saying, I could do something where inside of Gunslinger itself proper, yeah, it's a meme though. I mean, it's a goofy meme for work that they did. Meant to be goofy, meant to be cringy. So we could do an asset texture, and then we could have stuff like this, right? These could be declared inside of Gunslinger, which I wouldn't mind. So we have a graphics texture descriptor. Maybe that. And then, yeah, any of this stuff. I think I'd be okay with this, honestly. Because then again, you don't have to use the asset subsystem. You could make your own asset subsystem, I don't care. And then you could use these descriptions if you want, which is perfectly fine. And then that would mean that the immediate mode doesn't need to know about the asset management utility. And that also meant that writing the asset management utility wasn't even necessary, but you know, it's still useful to have and something that I wanted to have eventually anyway. So I think I'll do this. I think I've decided what I'll do is inside of Gunslinger, I'll create this stuff. So like asset types or something like that. Maybe below, well, it actually needs to be below everything. So here's the implementation, GS engine. So let's do it up here. right? Something like that. And then we need to have maybe GS asset load, GS asset texture load from file might be the name. That way any of these declarations, you would do GS asset, the type, and then the file. Which let me think about how to do the other. Okay, so we'll do that. Do that in font. I don't want to include that yet. And I'm fine with that. And then really for this, we could just include a texture, which holds the handle, but also holds description and descriptor information, because we would be interested in, if you were serializing this stuff out, you needed this information, then that would be something you could be interested in doing. I also have a mind to not destroy this data, just pass it back to the user. So if you create an asset, which maybe that's a something like that. Where you can decide if you want to hold on to the data or not. I don't know. I do not know. I think I have the Bolt 32T. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm okay with this so far. So let's do this. Implementation. Byte buffer stuff, we have engine stuff, camera stuff, util, platform, audio. So let's do asset stuff right above this. Should be fill this stuff out. There might be something in the future where, because you want to be able to declare, the descriptor for the texture. So in the future we'll do all that stuff. For now, I don't really care, but that will come up pretty soon, I guarantee it. So we pass in all of our parameters for the texture loading. Also, this is how you do default parameters, by the way, or at least you could. So whenever I pass in this function to a function pointer that's something like this, anything that's after this is optional, right? You don't have to pass these things in. You have to make sure that you have at least one solid parameter for this to work. So you can't have something like this. This won't compile. And that's because the compiler doesn't know where to put this pointer. It needs something solid, basically. So you could have it with just one parameter and then an ellipsis after the fact. That'll work because it knows where to start the counting for the arguments. But you could do something like this, and then you can have any number of parameters that you want, you know, after the fact. And if the user doesn't fill out, let's say you had like this. If you use zero initialization as your default, and you don't accept that as a value, then what you could do is use that as a default and then do whatever you wanted inside of the function to default that value, if that makes sense. So let's say that we had this free data and then we had a uint32 something, and whenever the user calls this function, they only pass in the free data parameter. They don't pass this in. So this is going to be defaulted to 0 when it's passed in. So stack allocated to 0 or stack set to 0. Then what you could do is you could say, you know, if something or if not something, you know, and then set default to some default value and then use that. So that's a way to do default parameters. Okay. All right, so loading this in, and then what we want to do is if we free the data, which maybe we should hold, maybe we should, by default, you want to free the data so you don't have to pass something up. So if keep data, maybe that's what we want to do. And then we'll say if not keep data. So then the default will be the default will be that you don't keep the data because this will default to 0, and so then we're going to free it and then we'll set it. Otherwise you'll keep the data and then you'll have that if you decide that you want to hold on to the texture data, which is, again, that's useful for like serialization. So if you want to serialize the file to disk, you want to hold on to the texture data so that you can do something with that data and then spit it out to disk, and then you can free it after the fact, which is something that probably will add eventually. I don't know if it'll be as a part of the asset subsystem. It might be part of like a reflection system, and then a serializer that sits on top of that. I don't know what that looks like yet. Okay. All right, so that works. Let's do a load font. do all this stuff. Good, good, good. We have a graphics description. So the texture.handle is this. And then make sure to do that. Okay. I guess just to keep things clean, I'll just put this at the top. It's fine. Okay, so we've got our two functions here for loading stuff. Let's make sure this compiles. See, baked characters, a redefinition. Okay, so let's get rid of that. Actually, let's get rid of all this, and we're going to use this instead from the internal. Asset definitions here. So we're going to register an importer with a get asset texture T. File. Okay. Convert GS handle, GS graphics texture T, asset main 58. Right. So we're trying to pass in this. This is actually the handle that we need. Now convert from asset texture T, so I'm doing it as well. And that should work. Should be the same, and it is. Okay. All right. So that works, and now what we could do is start working on the immediate draw to take in a font, because now it's in core level asset. I don't care about it necessarily knowing about that. So let's just call it text. Do X, Y, and we want the text, and then we'll pass in just a pointer to a font. I think that's fine. I think that's all I need. Render pass submit, blah, Bezier. Okay. Hey Lion, how are you? So I have some draw text stuff in here, so let's look at this. Okay. Oh yeah, and then color. Do you need a color? uint atr, uint atg. Thank you. Rusty? What does rusty mean? Okay. All right, so now for the text, let me get back up my previous code here. Okay. And we're just gonna copy this and convert it over to what we have now. So I don't need this, I don't need this, we have the font. Okay, so okay, and then we draw triangles. So enable texture 2D, don't need to do that. C4UB, GSI, RGB, and A. And then we iterate through our text. We get an align quad. So let me go ahead and call this FP. Oops. And I'm already glad that I held on to the texture information because I'm going to need that. So we have texture.description.width.height. Create vec3s. And then we do GSI TC2FV. Beautiful. Pass in this. UV0. GSI 3F. Yeah. V3FV, and then instead of CB, we do GSI. Increment text, and then we end. that should be that. Awesome. So let's see if this works now. And that might be all we need. So instead of doing this, we'll do a 2D camera, and then we'll say GSI text. Let me get this again, just so I remember. So we pass in a reference to the GSI. We'll do it at 100, 100. Text will be, sample text, whatever. And then the font pointer will be font. Gorgeous. And then we'll just do, let's do red. There it is, but we're flipped. So Shankar asks what I'm doing right now. I finished up some of the asset subsystem stuff that I was doing, so the asset utility. Made some engine level asset declarations, made it where you can register importers, all that kind of stuff. And now I'm just finishing up text rendering for the immediate mode. So our UVs are flipped, so let's do this. Might be that simple. Nope. Okay. Let me see, whenever, this might actually be something inside of here. How come you use C with OpenGL and not an engine? Because I'm an engine developer and I don't like using other people's code for the most part. Like I'm writing an asset subsystem right now. That wouldn't make sense to do that instead of Unity, right? Okay, so I think it might be doing this flip, might be the issue. So let's just not flip. Shit, maybe not. Oh no, I need it to be, yeah, okay. Hey, Chandra. Am I even doing a flip map here? Yeah, I am. You need help. What do you need help with? Life? Let me filing with this. Let me look at this. Roberto asked, do you prefer C or C++? I prefer C. C99 all the way. Let's see. Carol asks, is the coordinate system in your render increasing upwards or downwards? I assume downwards because you use STB true type without a wrapper. So the coordinate system for the 2D camera, or the UI camera, it increases upwards. Default, and the only reason for that I thought there's a bot on the chat, just like there's, oh yeah, sorry, no bots. I am boomer all the way when it comes to chat stuff. I might have to draw this out. Usually drawing pictures like this helps me kind of figure it out. So I know what the issue is. It's if I go into the 2D, like camera 2D, and I swap these. Let's just do this. Well, now it's off the screen. Yeah, this does the same. But it has to do with inside of here setting this up. So it sets it to the center of the screen, and then it flips the orientation. And the only reason for that is that the way this math works is that if you don't flip the orientation, your rotations are not counterclockwise anymore, they're clockwise, which is kind of odd. You know, at least it is to me. Maybe it's more odd to have it the other way, where it's not a downwards orientation. But you know, I don't know. But I think for this, you can just figure out these UVs and it'll be fine. Won't be a big deal. This might, maybe this will do it. Well. Because I don't like C++. It's got too much extra garbage in it that I don't need. Also, do you write shaders? Yeah, so all the shaders are handwritten. So if I do this, it's flipped, which is interesting. So I should flip the UVs in here. Oh man. So let's see. And right now it's flipped by orientation to where 0, 1. So where there's a 0, I need to swap with a 2. Where there's a 1, I need to swap with a 3. So 2, 1, 0, 2, 3, 1. I think. Yes. I'm a genius. Okay. So we have some sampled, there's some simple text rendering happening now. One thing I might do is have the ability to do this. So if you pass in null, what it'll do is grab a default immediate mode text or immediate mode font. So I think I'll do that next, and then we should be more or less done with the immediate mode stuff. Other than, I mean, like the core important stuff, other than adding some more primitive definitions, like I need cones, I need cylinders, I need capsules. Stuff like that's useful, especially for physics debugging, so that'll be something that I'll add. Maybe before I push this library out, but I'm not sure. Let's see, I'm not good with math. Well, get good with math. See, I need a good resource to start from. I want to build things with WebGL. Yeah, go to, there's a YouTube video series. It's called Art of Code or something like that. And the guy uses Shader Toy, so you can follow along with him. You don't have to download anything. And he goes over Opengl or GLSL. And there's a lot of interesting math in there. It's mainly a ray tracing series, but you can follow that. You can also go to learnopengl.com, which is a good resource. You don't have to be that great at math to do shader stuff, depending on what you're doing. And yeah, I am using a Vim mode. So, like I said, I think what I'll do is this, and then check to see. So if the font pointer is null, then do this. Otherwise, you know, we'll okay. What Raylib does, which I think is smart and what I'll probably do, well, maybe not. In order to get away from switching texture binds, what it does is that he has an empty character that he embeds into the font atlas, and it's just a white square, and then he uses that as the default texture. If you don't want to have textures enabled. For now, I'm not going to worry about that, though. That's an optimization thing that's whatever. So we'll set it to that. Otherwise, get to use default font. So we need a default font. If we go back to what I had before, I'm actually using IMGUI's default font, which is the Proggy. So I'm going to need to include some of this in here. And for now, I'll just embed this inside of the immediate mode. I don't necessarily care. So that should be a static thing. Yeah, so it's a static. So what we'll do is inside of immediate mode, I'm just going to hold a default font. Up here, text defaults. And then when we go to create this, we'll create the default font. However, we're going to need get default compressed font data, which I think is what I need to call, which is this, yes. So I'm going to need to have this up here. Okay, and then we'll create a font from that data. I suppose I should pass in or make a function to be able to do that. Create our default font here. I'm gonna need a util for doing that. Load font from file. It's either that or just do this. For now, I'll just do this. Fuck it. Don't need to do this. The character pointer data that I want is that. And I will not be freeing TTF. Okay. Texture description, and then we want GSI dot, what is it? Font default, yeah. That should be good. Get rid of this. Maybe, hopefully. Point size and declared identifier. I agree. So let's set this to, I don't know, 16. Maybe that's the default point size, 386. path undeclared 419. It's because we're not doing this. Shit. Let's see. Let's look at the chat. Let's see, I recently learned C and I fell in love with it, but I feel like I'm going the wrong way. Everybody's saying that to write a working thing in C, you may need to work twice as hard. There's some truth to that. The more granularity that you expose to yourself, then the more that you have to do for yourself. This is why people have, whenever they go from something like OpenGL, which is implicit, to something more explicit like DX12 or Vulkan, they get kind of overwhelmed because they've been spoiled in a way. You know, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, abstraction's there to make your life easier, but the unfortunate side effect of abstraction is that it makes you a little lazy as well. So, you know, it's good and bad. But, you know, you have the potential to be more productive if you have more abstractions. So, some advice. Yeah, just stick with it. Just keep going. I've been doing C over a decade. So, just keep going. Do a bunch of exercises. Make small things. Get used to manipulating memory directly. That's one of the big things that people have trouble with. You know, I still have trouble with it from time to time. Especially doing, you know, funky void pointer manipulation using macros and all that kind of stuff. So, just like anything else, it's a tool that you gotta get used to. Okay, so this is crashing. Why? So let's go ahead and step through it. Let's get down to where I actually start doing the font stuff. Okay, so that should be good. Okay. Okay, so I think it's all fine. It's probably when I'm actually using it. I think that's when it's crashing. I don't think I actually use the default. So GSI text, I don't, and then I try to use it, right? Yeah, FP. So let's say that, because it's not a const, actually we could make it a const asset pointer, but not a const pointer to an asset, and we could just set our asset pointer here. So we'll do that, and then we'll bind the texture for whatever this is. And if we don't have a pointer, then we'll do the asset, the default font. Okie dokies. And then okay. Yeah, join the Discord. There's like, I'm on my way to 300 people. You could be the 300th person. Wouldn't that be cool? Don't you want to be that person? But yeah, seriously, we have a lot of engine programmers in there, game developers, graphics programmers, people that are just starting out, people that have been doing it, for as long as I have or longer. So you're bound to learn something. God. Okay, why are you not working? Create a bigger point size, maybe. I don't know. I am getting nothing. Time to step through. Is this null? No, the data looks fine. Right, if I actually call that. So decode 85. Oh, I'm not decoding it, so that's probably why. We're actually use this. Let me go to the other one. Yeah. Geez. Okay, so that's the problem. So I need to grab that data and then I need to decompress it, and then I can use it. I'm not doing that. So I'm just using. This looks fun. Just to be decompress. Where's the decode? So I'm going to need to do that as well. Let's just, I don't need that. Okie dokie. Okay. All right, so decompress all this stuff. Yeah, I need to do that. Instead of TTF, we do the decompress data. I'm sure we free it down here. Yeah. Okay. No guarantees that works. 16 point alpha. Let me just make sure. Don't need point size. I don't think I need the font info because, yeah, I do. Okay. All right. Diaglyphs. STB decompress length. Okay, so what does that require? It might be the image right implementation or the STB define. Let me do that. Hey, Rudy. Thanks, Saeed. Appreciate it. So up here, let's go ahead and just dump all this in as well. GS external. . Come on. Alright, so I think I've defined somewhere else. Let's see. Redefinition for STBI. Do I have STB defined somewhere else? No. Okay, I do have it right here though. So maybe this stuff should be up here in Util. That's fine. All right. Oh my gosh, this keyboard is dying. Okay. That looks ridiculous. Okay, so yeah, that's an issue. So it's this that is a problem. Yeah, it's not going to do that. So I want that to work. I don't want to have to do that. I think this will flip it though. Oh boy. Come on. This freaking keyboard. Let me make this larger. Actually see what's going on. I guarantee you guys can't see that. GS immediate draw create. Let's do like 64. All right, so the bearing for some of the glyphs are off, and it's not the glyph information that's wrong, it's the UV stuff that I'm doing, so I'm gonna have to fix this. Two ways: either by actually fixing the UVs, or by shifting the bearing for each of these glyphs, which I don't know what would be more annoying. I do not know. Both are annoying. Honestly, I'd like this to work. However, hold on. Let me think about when I'm actually doing this crap. So I'm going to be like this. 0, 1, 2, 3. Oh yeah, 2, 1, 0. Okay. 2, 3, 1. Yeah. Because if I do it the other way, 0, 3, 2, 0, 1, 3. So now that's correct in terms of the what am I trying to say? That's correct in terms of the bearing. Like that's perfect. Now it just needs to be flipped along the Y and flipped along the X. Which is an issue. Because if I do that here, then whenever you do a 3D camera, it's going to be flipped because the flip is actually happening inside of the camera. It's not happening in here. Damn. So let me try to mess with the camera. Maybe that's the solution, is just make the camera make sense and not do this. But I think also part of the problem with that is that face culling, well, face culling is not enabled. So that shouldn't be happening there. So I'm not seeing anything. So I think that's all upside down. Yeah, but here I'm not seeing it. Yeah. Huh. It should be there, but man. Is it because the fucking face culling? It should be disabled. That shouldn't be. Make sure all this is disabled. Something weird going on, as usual. If I swap this, oh wait, I had it. Oh wait, hold on. Did I just have that swapped? No, I didn't have that swapped. No, I did not. Swap this. I don't see it. These should be swapped as well. And then let me, like, if I do a negative, do I see it then? Is it above the screen? No. What about here? At what point do I see something? Where the hell are you? No. What about this guy? Again, face culling is disabled, so I should be seeing something somewhere. Do I have the window size? Nope. GSFact2 WS equals GS platform window size V. Oh, shit. I'm not going to see that period. Let's do this, -1000 to 2000. Does it cover the screen? No. Okay. So I have no reason to believe that this is gonna work. Yeah, none at all. So let's just get rid of all this garbage. Okay. So for some reason, depth being enabled is messing with me. Fantastic. The face culling. Which is interesting. So why would, is the blend? Disabled somewhere? I don't fucking know. Okay, chat, let's see. Incon asks, he's trying to use GLFW. Whenever you get the GL clear function, you get a reference error. Sounds like your context isn't set up correctly. Go back through the documentation and make sure that your context is set up right. Edwin asks, hey, I'm intrigued as to the use of define over inline. Is there a benefit? Depends on what you're asking. So for stuff like this, I have to do macros because I'm using generics, right? So you pass in a type, which you can't do in a typical function. And I have to use that so it can hash the particular type down to a 64-bit integer, and then use that as a key for a hash map. Yeah, thanks for watching the videos, guys. I appreciate it, Chandra. And range on Red Bull Don Lafrigo. Man, that's a hell of a username. But yeah, this is why I do this. Because I have to do stuff like this, which is take this type, stringify it via a macro, and then hash that string into a 64-bit unsigned integer. And then use that for a hash table lookup. Okay, so, gosh. For some reason, so that's correct orientation, but for some reason now, the texture's not bound. Did I get rid of the texture? Oh yeah, I got rid of the texture binding. That's why. Duh. No. This should bind the texture. So what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Let me look at, if I turn this off. Okay, if I turn this off. Okay, and if I turn this off, for some reason, depth being enabled is getting rid of it completely, which makes no sense. But also depth being enabled, for some reason, ruins my texture binding. The fuck is that about? Buddy. If I call GSI texture, all right, let's pop into there. There's something weird going on. All right, let's just start here. Oh, phantasmic. So I think that's because in here, you know, there are not many graphics programming YouTube channels out there. Yeah, there's very few, unfortunately. But, you know, this is my Data J. This is my bread and butter, so to speak. Like, I'm very comfortable with it. So it might be something that I could capitalize on. I don't know. Okay, so this is all fine, it's whatever. Depth enabled, what do we do here? So it's set to 1, so we're not doing that. We're gonna flush everything previous, so we should have stuff in here. We do. Do our binds, set our bindings, draw, clear the verts. And then we're gonna set enabled to 0, and then set our pipeline. What's our prim type? It's 2, which is triangles, which should be fine. Okay, so we keep that. Depth enabled, 0, stencil enabled, 0, face cull enabled, 0, blend enabled, 0. Is this clamp not working? Oh, I'm an idiot. This is why you step through your program, people. Because there's no way in hell you'd ever catch that if you didn't. No, it's not gonna load. Don't step through. I don't know if that solved it, but we're gonna check. All right, did. Super duper. Okay, so now the orientation is correct. I am going to keep, so I changed my, the camera. So what I was saying earlier, where the camera 2D, it's a UI camera. So what it does is that it puts the view matrix in the center of the screen, and it sets the projection matrix in orthographic to where the scale is pixel scale, right? So it's screen dimensions. So 0, 0, top left corner, and then screen width and screen height is going to be the bottom right corner. The way I had it earlier was bottom left corner was going to be 0, 0 up to here. The only issue with that is that it's flipping everything, including the font, and it's more important to have this font flipped correctly than it is to keep rotations to be counterclockwise, like actual radian rotations that you would expect mathematically. I don't, whatever. If you don't like that, whatever. It's more important to do this because this is why. So let's say I don't want a 2D camera. I want a 3D camera. And all this stuff. We'll do all this. Actually, hold on. Let me see if I keep depth enabled, does that still mess this up? No, that's fine. So I'm not going to change any of this. Depth can be enabled. So if I turn this into a 3D camera, now you're not seeing it. Let's put it in the center of the screen. Let's not do any of this other stuff. Let's set everything that we had. And okay. ST's undeclared. Maybe? Anything? No? Okay, maybe not. Let's put this in the center. Let's make sure I'm getting something. Okay, so I should see that at least. Okay, so I've got that. The rotation's not, oh, it's because I'm not actually applying it here. So let's just, okay. And there's the other text. It's huge. So let's push on a matrix. And then we'll do our text in there, in between this push and pop. And we'll do a scale. I don't know. That's GSI. Still huge. All right, it's a little better. Also, I mean, it's not going to be a 64 font size for this, so let's go back to here. We're actually creating. I think the original should be about 16 point. Okay, there we go. So now we have 3D text. Oh, but it is flipped. It is going to be flipped. Son of a bitch. And that's because the camera's flipped. Well, hold on, let's look at that. So I set this back to a 2D camera. I'm trying to make it to where you don't have to flip the goddamn text in order to use it. That would be nice. Like, where does this show up? Okay, we're rotating. It looks like it's at the bottom. I think I saw it. Yeah. So but it is flipped. So, Jesus Christ. I don't think there's a way around it, unfortunately. So if you're doing 3D text, you're gonna have to keep in mind, I guess, that the text is gonna be rotated. So you're gonna have to flip it. That's fine. It's more of the common use case that you're doing 2D text than 3D text. No, that's 3D. And why don't I see you? Oh, that's right, because it's... Okay, so then if you're doing this, you actually need to rotate it. Rotate it 180 degrees. Let's make this on the x-axis. There you go. So now the orientation's correct. Just kind of an unfortunate side effect. Yeah, and I don't want to do like a 3D text. 3D text thing. I don't know. The texture stopped working once you disabled depth. No, it was a bug that I had whenever I was binding the pipeline. So whenever I go to set pipeline state, I pass in, or I use the immediate mode's cached pipeline state attributes, and then I hash all of that into a key, and then I grab a pipeline to bind from that. What I had earlier was it was just copy paste error. These are all depth enabled instead, and so like the face culling and the stencil and the blend states were all just being set to what the depth was, which they were all disabled. So that meant the blend was always disabled, which meant that anything that was alpha enabled was not drawing, and the texture for the font is alpha blended. So you have to have blending enabled or it won't show up. Or it'll show up as a whole. So it's working now. So there you go, 3D text. And again, you can pass in a custom font pointer if you want. You don't have to use the default, and that should work, and it does. Getting some, the reason this isn't working, or look, it's doing that is because the see, rotate scale. It's because of Z fighting with these two. So let me translate this. Let's just go, let's keep it there, and we'll move it back a unit. Or maybe forward a unit. So there you go. Now we don't have any Z fighting. Fun times. Okay, so what does this mean? It means we have default fonts loaded up. We have a default texture for the immediate mode. It's just a white texture that gets blended into various shapes. You could pass in pointer to a font and it'll use that to do text rendering. You can make your own fonts. And then immediate mode drawing using the graphics backend. So I think maybe some cleanup is in order, and then I'm gonna start working on a release for this library. So what does that mean? Well, I'd like to do a video covering it, an actual video, not just a stream. So it's gonna be probably another game engineering video. Is this text backwards again? Is that fucking backwards? Yeah, I think that stuff's backwards. Damn it. Yeah, it's upside down and backwards. Huh. Alright, I need to look at that. That shouldn't be the case. All of this is getting closer to having a release for this. And then doing videos covering it, showing it off, making more stuff around it. What's your take on Cherno? I like Cherno. He does a lot of things that I disagree with, but I like Cherno. I like how dedicated he is. I like how hard of a worker he is. I think he's charismatic in ways that I'll never be, which is admirable, you know. So I've got nothing but good things to say about Cherno. Sure, there's things that, I mean, I'm not a C++. I mean, I am a C++ dev by trade. I am not a C++ dev by choice. So I don't like C++. I think the language is beyond overly verbose at this point. Whenever I used C++, I used it minimally in the first place and was very C oriented, and got to a point where I realized that things that I wanted to do, I was getting tripped up by the language itself, especially stuff like RAII and other stuff that the compiler does for you. So I just got away from it. Now if there's something wrong with memory, it's because I'm not doing it, which I like. But, you know, he likes it and he uses it, and you know, it's whatever. Use what you want to use. I don't care, you know. That being said, there are some things that he does that I don't agree with. Like he did a video on serialization not too long ago, and he was doing it all manually. I think there's better ways to do it, especially if you write your own, you know, reflection code, which you could do very simply. But yeah, I like Cherno a lot. I think he gets a lot of unnecessary flack. What do I want to do? What's the problem? This font. So the font rendering is still, I think it's when I'm loading the text, loading the font. Because let me let's, well, it's not flipped. Yeah, that's right, because the flip was actually happening. No, it's not. I was popping that matrix. So why was that flipped? That doesn't make sense. Okay, that doesn't make sense. Let's not scale these UVs anymore. Let's actually look at it. And then let's not rotate. Yeah. Oh man, this 2D camera's killing me. This 2D camera is killing me. So let's do two different things. Let's do this, and let's do one right next to it. 2D space. Work with me here, dude. That is not the right size. There you go. So, I think the font itself needs to be flipped. So let's go ahead and flip that. I don't want to touch this. I think actually loading the font is incorrect. I'm not flipping it here though, but maybe I should. Yeah. Okay. So now it's flipped, and now the 3D and the 2D orientation are similar, which is what I want. That was the main thing that was messing me up. Okay, so this now means that 0, 0 is up here. So 0, 0 is top left corner, which is fine. That's what I expect. Okay, that is good. Where's the other text though? I'm not seeing the other text now. Right, because this is just the rect, but now it's not rendering the actual fucking text. Not at all. Not in the slightest. Okay. Well, I know this is right, so I think we can safely go to just the draw function for the text. Is face calling, let me make sure that's Yeah, that's face calling disabled. Okay. Okay, but that's upside down. That's not. What was it? Swap 2 with 0, 3 with 1. It's these Y's that need to be swapped now. Jesus God. How am I doing this actually? No, that doesn't make sense because you pass in the size. Shit. That is not good. What does it actually give me? Yeah, that gives me screen coordinates. Well, not really. Negative 29, 0, 0. Maybe there's a way to flip this. I don't know if there is. Because now, well, let's see. Maybe this works now. Maybe this is how I should have been flipping it all along. Okay. So now when I do 0, 0, it should be off the screen because it's the fucking hell. God damn it. Why is negative z a forward vector? It's a standard convention for Opengl. Yeah, there's like a weird offset for this. Let me do null. Okay. Oh man, this is all kinds of fucked. I'm gonna go get some more coffee.